Hello, this is a narrated time lapse of a painting that I did of a parrot. You can't tell it's a parrot yet, but it will turn into one. I've started off using Infinite Painter, and here we go. This is laying in all the basic blocks and colours. You can see it's what kind of parrot it's going to be, and playing around with a few brushes. You can see, putting stuff in, undoing a few things. As you can see, there's quite a lot of detail that's going to take place in the wing, so I'm very wary of that, but I didn't want to overdo the detail. I just wanted to splash some colour in and then seeing what happens. There's a very saturated, vibrant colour of this parrot, and here I was overlaying with some overlay as a blend mode to really push the colours to a saturated level. All of that I will bring back a bit more, because I think at this point in time it's probably slightly overdone. I did have an idea of a black background to bring the focus on the parrot a bit more. I'm adding some detail here around the face, and then I put in a layer which is just a certain level of opacity, reduce the opacity a little bit, and trying to get the definition of these feathers. I was struggling a bit with that aspect for a lot of the painting. Here you can see I'm playing around with the palette knife that it has in Infinite Painter. Just for an idea, I had an idea that I just wanted all the feathers from the wing just to really shoot out, but I don't think that really worked in the end. So I tried all that, but I ended up getting rid of a lot of it. I kept it for a while, but it didn't quite work overall. Here I'm just adding in more and more detail, blending more and more things, trying to get more mid-tones in there because there's a bit too much of high contrast at times. And again, I'm still fighting with this wing a bit. I'm still not quite happy with it. That's why I'm kind of putting in these colours again and trying to get it to look a bit better regarding the light, because the actual reference is very nice regarding, but I wasn't really getting that effect because the light was coming across and hitting the wing in a really interesting way, but I wasn't really getting that at this stage. So I was still fighting with it a tiny amount. Still in Infinite Painter at the moment. There will come a point. There we go. I got rid of the background. I still wasn't quite sure whether black was quite right, to be perfectly honest. I may have wanted something with a bit more interest in. Still fighting again with this wing. Just took the eraser and took the edges off to make them really pointy, but that wasn't really what the reference looked like. They looked more curved, or certainly curved on one end and then straight on the other. More like a feather, but this was kind of more like a picket fence at the moment. So I'm very much aware of that. Playing around with just a big cloud texture in Infinite Painter to see whether that would work, because it might sit better in the overall ambient light coming through and hitting it, because black maybe wasn't quite working unless you had like a real black studio with a bright light firing in front of the parrot, but that didn't really seem as if it was a typical real world situation. Trying to blend the background out, seeing if I can get something that looks painterly and interesting. As you can see, doing a lot of experimentation here. Blurring the back out may work. Importing it into ArtRage now to starting to apply all the detail. Doing my usual trick of adding in the texture using a multiply layer with some thick oil. I'm still very wary of that background. I still really want to turn it into something else at the moment. Again, I've got rid of it. I'm still thinking about it. As the parrot's on a separate layer, it means I'm going through the eraser again and just trimming down the edges of this wing, rotating because it's easier that way. Still not quite happy with it, but I'm getting there. This is something I often do with the background. Put the paint tube down with a whole load of different colours and then use the palette knife to smooth everything out. So it always gives a nice painterly effect. So it seems as though I have an idea maybe a light colour would work due to the ambient light being more realistic that way. Change the contrast there because I wanted to dull things down a bit so I could start to apply lighter colours. And this is what I'm doing here with the brush. Just got a standard brush. When I use the oil brush I tend to have it quite high level of stiffness and low level of thinners. I think that seems to work better for me because I get a nice bit of control. If I have it on like everlasting oil or something like that, I always really struggle with controlling the paint. So again, I wanted to add a bit more interest and lighten things up a bit, but I wanted to focus a bit more on the mid-tones regarding this. And again, my favourite palette knife in Art Rage, pulling all the paint around. It always adds some really good extra detail to a painting using that. So I'm working fairly hard on adding the detail to this, and I seem to be avoiding the wing as much as I possibly can and focusing on the main body of the parrot, which is actually starting to come along a bit more now. Now I've gone into the wing, really want to sort that out if I possibly can do. Adding in, still going using the palette knife, pulling the paint around. Starting to take more shape now. I'm starting to get more of the effect of that light on the wing. Now this is something I often use when I'm not really that happy with the background. It's just black at the moment. So what I have a habit of doing is duplicating this layer, scaling it up, and then putting it behind whatever is in the foreground, because the lighting's going to be in the right place and the texture is going to be consistent with the foreground. And sometimes if you scale it right up and rotate it, you can get some really interesting effects. So that's what I'm trying here, just to see if anything actually works. That may look interesting, but I'm still not quite sure about it, so I'm moving it around again. As you can see, it looks quite good, but you're losing the parrot slightly, so I may have to do something about that. So as you can see, I dulled it slightly in the background to push the parrot forward slightly. Still not happy with that background, still fighting with it a bit. So I'm trying a whole load of blend modes to see if anything accidentally looks good or looks interesting. That seems to, because it's preserving the more cloud, sky, ambient background, but still having more textures in. So here what I did is I overlaid a colour layer, and because I wasn't quite happy with all the colours, and what I wanted to do, what I do then is I use the airbrush set to a white and then go over it, which effectively is bringing the original colour back in. So it's a way of using, masking. Art Rage doesn't have any masking, but you can use certain techniques using the airbrush and using white or sometimes black to bring things in and out. So you can kind of use masking to a certain extent. And again, I was just playing around with the gradient fill because I don't quite like the colours of it, and I want to just tweak the lighting slightly. So I was just overlaying all this because I want to make the wing more prominent regarding the colours. And I think I am getting there overall with the feel of it. I'm still building up the layer and level of detail on that wing. As you can see, I've got quite a few layers here with a whole load of different colours. And this is what I do sometimes, is I move one on top of the other, change the opacities on different one, change the blend modes. Sometimes if I disable something that looked really good, it all of a sudden, because I've added some in above it, they take priority and it looks better than it did before. Really just trying to figure out the lighting, making it look a bit more interesting. And then I liked all that, so as you can see, what I did is I merged everything down to make things a bit more simple. And then what I wanted to do was add a bit of rim lighting. You can't go wrong with a bit of rim lighting. And again, coming in to try and sort this wing out, try and add in the extra level of detail. Because actually there's a lot of stuff going on here regarding lighting, and I don't think I've quite got the effect yet that I want. Still playing around with colours a little bit. It's certainly getting there. Still not quite happy with the shapes of these. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm playing around with the oil brush and the tapering of it to see whether I can just overlay a single brush stroke to indicate a feather. So I'm kind of, and as you can see, I just had a single brush stroke and then I've turned it into a layer and then I'm duplicating it to see whether it'll work or not. And then maybe changing the opacity after all that. And then on each one, as you can see, I've got a duplicate layer. I mean, this is something I very rarely do. But on each one, what you can do is then I'll get the airbrush out and then airbrush underneath the previous one so I can get some semblance of overlapping. That was my kind of idea regarding this. And again, it didn't quite work, but I've duplicated the thing that almost did work and I've changed the opacity and I'm changing blend modes. I'm working really hard to try and get these things to work, and I think I'm pretty much, it's very subtle but things still exist, but I almost pretty much ended up removing it all. So I'm still fighting with this wing quite a lot. I had a feeling it would cause me a few difficulties. But then I'm learning all the time while I'm doing this, while I'm fighting with it. I'm changing all these different settings and seeing what effect it has on it. I even tried doing a little bit of selection and painting within it. So, and the thing is, I do get there in the end, and no painting is smooth, and I'm learning a lot by doing this as well. Trying to just use the paintbrush to get the texture and just get the feel for it. It's getting there. It's getting there. It's not actually a million miles away. I can certainly see better the separation of the wing from the background. I think that's working quite well. And the light hitting the wing a bit better. And as you can see now, I've got rid of the picket fence's sharp lines and they look a little more like feathers now. Just trying to apply, I've set a layer onto a texture, the canvas to a texture, and put some pastel on it because I just wanted to try and apply a bit of texture to the feathers. Just to have the light bouncing off things a bit. Again, I'm at the stage of experimentation here, just polishing things off. And there we go, that's pretty much it. As you can see, it was a bit of a struggle at times, especially with the background and the wing, but I got to a point where I was kind of quite happy with the results. I got nice painterly effect, we've got some nice sharp colours in there, it's quite saturated, but that's where the reference was. And I think in the end the background worked quite well in the fact that it was quite dull and grungy, but it had the same ambience as the foreground. Okay, there we go, that's my narration over painting a parrot.